and welcome to the University of Tasmania's online series for Alumni Explore, our first session for 2023. We have an exceptional number of attendees today, and I welcome you all. Firstly, as a reflection of this institution's recognition of the deep history and culture of this island, the University of Tasmania wishes to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Palawa people and custodians of the land upon which we meet, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. My name's Rebecca Cuthill and I'm the Director of Advancement here at the University of Tasmania. The series Explore provides an opportunity specifically for you, our alumni of the university, for lifelong learning and inspiration. This series offers an exclusive opportunity to connect with your peers, find amongst them innovators, thought leaders, and perhaps even potential collaborators. Our alumni community is an important part of the fabric of the university, and this is why we hope to provide opportunities tailored to your needs, such as this afternoon's webinar. Before we go any further, just a few housekeeping notes. First of all, your microphone, camera and raised hand function have all been disabled, so our guests will not be interrupted. However, we really encourage you to ask questions of our speakers today, and this can be done by typing them in the Q&A function that you see at the bottom of your screens. Now, I know today we might not get answered all of your questions, however, selection will be answered during the Q&A section later on in the session, and I thank the attendees who have already pre-submitted some questions in advance. I'd like to remind you that please keep your questions of general nature and not relate them to specific people. And finally, this session is being recorded for later access on our YouTube channel. So it's clear from the number of registrants for today's webinar that this topic has resonated with people. We know dementia has had a profound impact on those living with dementia as well as their families and communities, and in some cases, significantly altering quality of life. The Wicking Centre at the University of Tasmania is now the biggest provider of dementia education in the world, reaching thousands of students in over 100 countries. Tasmania is also recognised internationally as a leader in dementia research. Today, we're lucky to be joined by two members of our alumni community who are going to offer their insights on how to better understand dementia. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce our two speakers. First of all, distinguished Professor James Vickers, who's the Director of the Wicking Dementia Research and Education Centre. James completed a Bachelor of Science in 1988, Doctor of Science in 2004 at the University of Tasmania, and a PhD at Flinders University. His research interests include neurodegenerative diseases, particularly Alzheimer's disease, traumatic brain injury, structural brain plasticity, dementia risk reduction, and health services for dementia. James has a keen interest in the role of education for dementia, and this has contributed to the development of the Wicking Centre's massive open online courses, MOOCs, in dementia, the Bachelor of Dementia Care program, and the National Health and Medical Research Council funded Tasmanian Healthy Brain Project. Our second presenter is Tim England. Tim is a freelance dementia consultant and is a leading voice on dementia in Australia and has been active in this area for over 12 years. Tim completed a Bachelor of Dementia Care in 2016 and a Master of Dementia in 2021 at the University of Tasmania. Tim works to demystify and destigmatise dementia and advocates for people living with dementia and their families to live well. He's a skilled educator, consultant, and advanced care planner, and a public speaker who delivers contemporary scientific evidence-based best practice for person-centred care and support. We're incredibly grateful to have them both here today. Welcome, James and Tim.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Tim. So I'm going to start by buying it. As you know, this is an in-conversation format. We've got heaps to get through. So I wanted to start off with both of you and ask if you can briefly explain why do you do what you do, and have you personally been touched by dementia?
Well, perhaps if I might start. So I had my start in the academic world as a researcher, mainly in the neurosciences, so the study of the brain. And that was really the main thing that led me into becoming interested in how diseases that cause dementia affect the brain. But if we go back a bit earlier too, I did have a grandmother who quite clearly had dementia. Not quite sure whether she really had a formal diagnosis in her own lifetime, but did end up in institutional care, which was run by the state government at the time. And I remember, I guess, being particularly affected really by the conditions of institutional care at that time. And it was quite interesting that it was an era where we were deinstitutionalizing care for people with disabilities, but we'd become a race to institutionalize people who were older and had dementia. And I think many years later that did affect me, and I guess some of the directions that I've taken, and to some degree also the Wickings Centre, to look more carefully at the standard of care for people with dementia.
Yeah, thank you, James. Thank you. And Tim, yourself.
Good question. The first part, or the second part first, I don't actually have been personally touched by dementia in my family or in my immediate cohort of friends. But I come from a different direction. I come from 20 years of corporate before I entered into this sector. About 2010, I changed careers dramatically, and I entered the healthcare sector as a community care worker out in the field. Something totally different, took a redundancy in life and just went a new direction. And I discovered very quickly that I had very little knowledge about dementia, but I actually found out I could actually talk to people and cut through that communication fog that's around them. So that just started my whole journey to get more information. So I got more education. I discovered the fantastic Understanding MOOC in 2013 and did that. And that just started a whole new domino. Then I enrolled in the bachelor program in 2013 and graduated in 2016. And nobody told me that I couldn't study full-time and work full-time. So I did that because no one told me I couldn't do that. I graduated in 2016. I was on the Dean's Roles Board of Excellence because of my academic achievement, member of the Golden Key Honour Society. And then I left the aged care sector as a community care worker and actually started to move into public education workshops, purely because I discovered very quickly during my research for my bachelor that in our local area, there was little to no public education workshops or events at all. Considering where I live on the north side of Sydney, we've got a very large aging population, and we have almost twice the national average of people living with dementia in the community. So I chose to do something about that.
Yeah, terrific. Thanks, Tim. And thank you for the reflection on how you started your dementia journey through the MOOCs and the courses that we're offering here at the university. I'm sure there's a number of people who are participating today who can have had a similar experience as well. Which probably leads me to the question, James. Why Tasmania? Why is the Wickings Centre so important globally? And perhaps talk us a little bit through the journey that got you to receive this status.
Oh, good. Thank you. So the Wickings Centre is about 15 years old now, and it really got going because I was running a research group looking at the neurobiology of diseases that cause dementia. And meanwhile, in another part of the university, there was Professor Andrew Robinson, who was the Professor of Aged Care Nursing, and his background was in the social sciences. And normally social scientists and neuroscientists don't really talk to each other very much, but we got on quite well. And even at that point too, we could see that into the future that dementia was going to have substantial health and financial impacts, I suppose, and society impacts, as the numbers of people with dementia was forecast to grow quite substantially. So we thought it'd be interesting if we could work together, look at what sort of projects that might come out of different disciplines deciding to engage with each other. And I think that's really been the key to the Wickings Centre's success since then, is that we are a centre that's comprised of a variety of people from very, very different disciplines, but we've all decided that we will work together to try and tackle some of these issues that relate to dementia. Over the years, we sort of solidified our themes of around the care, cause and prevention of dementia, and that guides a lot of what we do in both research and education. And I guess probably really the main reason we've become quite well known across Australia and internationally is because of the free online courses or MOOCs that we run on dementia, understanding dementia and preventing dementia. And these really arose out of very early research that the Wicking Centre was involved with, and other groups that showed really it didn't really matter if you were involved in formal care for people with dementia, that is working in aged care in some way, or if you're an informal carer, say a family member with that experience of dementia, there was a good chance you didn't really know enough about dementia in order to provide good quality care. And that was really the seed for the Understanding Dementia MOOC, which we started in 2013. Since then, it's got to these MOOCs have got to over 600,000 or so enrolments, practically to every country in the world, and growing now in some interesting parts of the world, such as through Southeast Asia and Africa. So it was the idea behind the MOOCs was that there was really this sort of public health issue of lack of knowledge about dementia, and the MOOCs was an avenue to address that. And since then, we've also now developed our own undergraduate courses that relate to dementia care, as well as a postgraduate program that the Master of Dementia, of which Tim was one of our first graduates. And of course, too, research is a very important part of what we do, and broadly it's clustered in the areas of the care cause and prevention of dementia. And there's all sorts of really interesting projects that are going on that again come out of the sort of multidisciplinary nature of the centre.
Terrific, James. And probably just to the first part of my question though, do you think there's something particularly Tasmanian, or has you being in Tasmania benefited or not, the work that you do?
Yeah, so I think being the major, really sole university for the state, that led to us really having quite a wide variety of health areas that are covered by the university, particularly to the College of Health and Medicine. And when we naturally look for collaborations, and so again, where we got started with the Wicking Centre was us looking across the university where expertise did lie, and then bringing those people together to help form the Wicking Centre. So that's a bit of an island, I guess, approach to doing things. The other great advantage of doing things in Tasmania is that Tasmanians are great volunteers for health and medical research. And so we've had a couple of quite large studies that we've instigated in Tasmania that have really benefited from people giving their time to be part of those studies. So that's a real advantage that we do have in Tasmania.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Thanks so much. Yes, Tasmania has a great kind of, volunteer ethos, I think. So it's terrific to hear it's in medical research as well as other areas as well. So you mentioned, and I can already see some questions that are coming through online, the research. Could you perhaps talk a little bit about what's the latest research in dementia care, treatment and diagnosis?
Yes, no, thank you. Yeah, so these are very hot areas. Well, one thing about dementia research has grown tremendously across the world in just really in the last 10 years. But it remains a set of conditions or a set of diseases that cause dementia. In many ways, we don't really understand sometimes the underlying fundamental mechanisms of disease. So what causes these diseases to occur inside the brain. Our approach to diagnosis is probably also a little bit inadequate. The gold standard for a diagnosis of any form of dementia really is at post-mortem. So we want to be able to diagnose it effectively and efficiently much earlier than that. And then in terms of treatments, the drugs that are available for dementia really just provide symptomatic relief to some people at the early stages of the condition. So these are all areas that are really hot areas of research and that we're involved with to I guess to some degree. One of the really exciting areas is in diagnostics. So we are getting better tests to help diagnose dementia as early as possible. one of these lies in the area of what we call biomarkers. So this is when we could take a sample of your blood and then analyze it for the presence of particular proteins that are involved in neurodegeneration. And that would give us an idea of whether there is a neurodegenerative process underway inside the brain. And that's, again, a field that's moved really quickly. We're getting to the point that potentially with these biomarkers, we can detect the disease process many years before you might have clinical symptoms. And there's research that the Wicking Centre's involved with the Australian Dementia Network and other sites throughout Australia, just really to figure out whether these biomarkers are really going to greatly assist that diagnostic process. As I mentioned, we don't really have any cures, if you like, for the diseases that cause dementia, but there are new classes of drugs that are being developed. Some of these are in the realm of what we call immunotherapy. So they're using designed monoclonal antibodies that will target the abnormal proteins that start to develop inside the brain. Now, some of these have now been approved in the US through the FDA for use in human beings. So they've been through clinical trials. They remain really quite controversial, though, because there are arguments about whether they're effective enough and have a low profile of side effects so that they can actually be used widely in the population. What the results show is that they don't reverse dementia, but what they could do is potentially slow it down a bit over time. And that figure for one of the leading drugs is about 27%. So over time, at 27% less clinical deterioration. But they are expensive drugs. In the US, about $26,000 a year. At the moment, they've only been approved for people in very early stages of dementia. And there's a bit of a risk of some very unpleasant side effects, including swelling of the brain and hemorrhages as well. So it's likely if they become available and approved and available in Australia, they'll probably need to be delivered under very well supervised conditions. And it's unclear really whether they'll be subsidised to any great extent. The other area of research that doesn't quite get the attention that it should, and certainly not in terms of funding and resources, does relate to the quality of care. So we've been through a Royal Commission into aged care quality and safety, which really highlighted many of the problems we've got with dementia care across a number of settings. So what we really need now to be doing is sort of turbocharging research into the care of people with dementia, because the modelling shows that there'll be greater numbers of people with dementia in the next 10 or 20 years. And we're not probably providing the best quality care at this point. So, a lot of this care we need to figure out how we can provide good person-centered care where we can compensate when people have an area of disability, but also provide support where abilities may be preserved or remain in order to help them live a meaningful life. So I guess in the sense that too, we need to be working out to what degree we can support people to live at home for as long as possible. But if people should go into institutional care, how do we provide the best quality care as well too? So drugs and diagnosis, incredibly important, fast-moving area, but we shouldn't forget that these are people with a life-limiting condition, and we need to be doing all we can to support people with dementia and their carers as well.
Yeah, thanks, James. And I think that's a kind of terrific segue into the next question that I have, and as I said, some questions I can see coming through from our attendees is quite simple. Is dementia age-related? Perhaps, Tim, something you would like to talk to?
Yes, I would like to talk about that. But just before, I just want to go back to answer that question, saying why Tasmania, why the Wicking Centre?
Please.
As a recipient of the education, I have a slightly different view. It's all down to one simple word: people. The people that James and Andrew have put together have been outstanding. I've been the recipient of all of the MOOCs, the Understanding Dementia, Preventing Dementia, the Traumatic Brain Injury, and now I'm just completing the Multiple Sclerosis MOOC. And I've also done quite a few of the MOOCs a number of times over the years. And the reason for that is James and Andrew and his team have been very open to receive open and honest feedback on how the programs are being run and their design, and actually got us very much involved with the design process. Now, for their sins, they got open and honest feedback, which they took on board professionally. Some of it was robust discussions and so forth. But what the beauty is, every time I've gone back in and done the Understanding Dementia MOOC, or I'm working with some colleagues who are already doing the bachelor's, I can go back and see where they've had that continuous improvement, where you can see they've taken that feedback and applied it and made the programs more robust, more tailored, and more suitable as things change. As a comparison, I've done some other programs online with other institutions, and same thing, I did the program in 1 year, did it again for 3 years later, and it hasn't changed at all. Nothing has changed. Same slides, same material. So where James and Andrew, where they've really moved forward with this, is they've gone, okay, that part worked, that part didn't. How can we improve it for the next lot? And that's part of that continuous improvement. And that's one of the biggest reasons why they are now that global impact regarding dementia education, and that's highly recognised around the globe.
Yeah, look, thanks very much, Tim. I'm sure James is very grateful to hear that, and would point out as well, a number of people who are on the call have probably done the MOOCs, but we will be sharing links to the upcoming MOOCs as well. So if you want to do as Tim did and dip in a few more times to see the changes, we really do encourage it. So Tim, perhaps I just return back to the question, dementia, age-related.
Yeah, look, there is a relationship with age, but it's not a cause. Age is not a cause of dementia. It's just one of the risk factors that occurs as we get older. Other elements like, arthritis and other age-related conditions do have a relationship, but age is not a cause. And you can see that just the fact that you've also got younger onset dementia. You've also got childhood dementia, which is two words people hear that and go, is that for real? Yes, it is. So yeah, age is a risk factor, but it's definitely not a cause. And as we're going through more of the research and study and picking up more behavioural and lifestyle changes to prevent the onset or reduce the risk, yes, even though age is a risk factor, and we can actually modify some of that by changing some of our lifestyle activities like continuing education, social engagement, diet, exercise, brain training. There's a whole list, a whole raft of things that can be done to offset that related risk that is that occurred due to age.
Yeah, thank you. And James, did you have any more thoughts on that?
No, but it is interesting that many of these conditions are aging related. So there are likely to be important changes, in our body and in our brain through aging as well too, that contribute towards that risk. And in the Wicking Centre, we've certainly been quite active in trying to understand how normal aging might affect the brain, and then how that might relate then to subsequent risk of developing dementia.
And I can see we've got a question which I might bring in at the moment from I'm not meant to, but anyway, I'm going to go off piste here and just bring a question in from one of our attendees, because they're asking about, I think, the hereditary nature of dementia, and whether it affects male or female children, grandchildren equally. I'm just wondered, when we're talking about that, if you have some comments on that one as well.
Yes, so there's really, Tim indicated, what we have is what we refer to as non-modifiable risk, and then modifiable risk. So non-modifiable risk includes getting older, so aging is a risk factor, and another one is clearly genetics. And we know that there is a very small number of dementia cases that can be linked to specific genetic mutations. These tend to be younger onset versions of dementia. And by and large, we know what many of those genes are. And then if you should actually have one of those genetic mutations, there's a 50% chance of you passing it on to your children, unfortunately. Outside of that, we're also seeing a lot of exciting research is in genetic risk factors. So inheriting these versions of genes may increase or decrease your risk. And so they don't cause dementia, but they are associated with risk. And there are some quite strong genetic risk factors. Most famous one is apolipoprotein E. gene, but there's a whole host, dozens and dozens of genes that might provide a small contribution to your risk. And what you can actually do in research at this stage is sort of add up all of the positive and negative risk factors to give you what's called a polygenic risk score. Still doesn't mean you'll get dementia, but helps us to understand that risk a little bit better. Now, on males and females, we know that women are a much more greater risk of developing dementia. A big part of that is because women do live older than men. So there is an age gap in terms of longevity. So women tend to live longer, so that provides risk. But even if you took men and women at the same age, women still are at higher risk than men. And I wouldn't actually say we understand that why that is. At the same age, women are at higher risk, but there's been all sorts of research around, for example, the roles of hormones, particularly postmenopausal changes, etc., that might contribute to that. On top of that too, that some of the modifiable risk factors may also play a role there too, that women might have been exposed to some more of those more modifiable risk factors during their lifetime, and that might have contributed towards that higher risk at any particular age as well.
Thanks, James. So we're hearing about the risks. I suppose the flip side to that is, what can we do to reduce dementia risk? And more particularly, are there any other lifestyle factors that we should all be bearing in mind?
Yeah, so this is another really fast-moving area of research that really came to the pointy end in the last 10 years or so, is that the field is fairly confident that there are a range of modifiable risk factors, at least 12, which contribute to risk. And the modelling shows that if we could get rid of all of those modifiable risk factors, then there'd be 40% less dementia in the community. Just keep in mind that's from mathematical modelling. So these factors include midlife hypertension, obesity, low levels of physical activity, low levels of educational attainment earlier in life, excessive alcohol consumption, traumatic brain injury, hearing impairment, depression and social isolation, air pollution and diabetes. And me not having a great memory, you can probably tell I just read that off a list on my computer. But there are also other interesting risk factors that are emerging as possible modifiable risk factors. And these include the quality of your sleep and to the degree to which you're engaged in lifelong cognitive stimulation or cognitively stimulating activities. Now, most of those risk factors we know about from large-scale epidemiological studies where we can study the association of the risk factor with dementia. What we lack at the moment, though, is many what we call prospective studies or trials where we've addressed some of those risk factors and then seen actually a change in the risk of the population or the individual. And many of those studies are now being funded and will get closer to that. So that's an important caveat. These risk factors are associated with dementia, but at the moment we don't know absolutely how they might cause or relate to the causes of dementia.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks so much. So, Tim, you're obviously in your role out in the community. I'm just interested to explore a little bit about what kind of stigmas that you observe that are associated with dementia, and how can we all work to reduce them?
Good question. Yes, stigma it's out there, and many people report that just simply due to receiving a diagnosis, they hide the idea of the diagnosis from their friends and family because of stigma. Stigma is the negative labeling and stereotyping of to identify a person with a disability, with an illness, that they are suffering or they're lacking something. It's due in part to public awareness and understanding of the condition, and there are some cultural elements related to stigma as well. In certain cultures, it's very, very shameful to even discuss, let alone identify that someone may have a level of dementia. And there's three types of stigma that I encounter all the time. One is public stigma, which is the attitudes and beliefs of the general public towards someone with the condition in mental health generally and dementia, and towards the family members as well. There's self or personal stigma, where that person will internalize the stigma themselves and those negative public attitudes, and that actually has a negative response on how they perceive themselves and how they live. And there's also stigma by association, and I've actually been subject to this, where just because I work in that field and others, people go, oh, how can you do that? They actually look down on us sometimes because we work in that arena where they think, a person with stigma is, or a person with dementia is senile, or there's something wrong with them. So how can you bring yourself down to that, which is weird, but it's out there. And the way and the other impact the stigma has is it tends to stop people from seeking treatment because they're afraid or ashamed, or receiving an early diagnosis or any diagnosis at all. They feel there's something wrong, but they're not going to go find out about it. It prevents people from living their best quality of life possible because of the stigma. Stops them making plans for the future. It stops them from developing support networks around them, which is so important, living in the community with dementia. And it also prevents them or slows them down from joining clinical trials, which James was talking about is so important for current and future research, not just for treatment, but also for prevention. And the best way to look about overcoming this type of stigma is learn the facts, talk about it, do the MOOCs, not just the MOOCs, get educated, find out the right information, rule out the myths and the misinformation that's out there. Don't make assumptions that just because someone has got a diagnosis that there's something wrong with them or they need to stop their daily activities, they're still a person they're still the same person they were the day before the diagnosis than they are after the diagnosis. Use person-centered language. Words like sufferer and victim and demented and senile are not supportive. They add to that stigma. We tend to use phrases like a person living with dementia or a person with dementia, because that's more we're addressing the individual person, not the condition or the disease that's causing it. Be a friend. Just because a colleague or friend has this condition, they're still a friend. They haven't changed. They just need a little bit more understanding. Another big important one is supporting the caregiver, the care family, the family members, because anytime I've worked with an individual with the condition, I'm dealing with two individuals, the person with the condition and their family caregiver or their whole family. So you need to nurture and look after both sides. And also remember that a person with this condition, they're still a person inside. They are not the disease that's causing the dementia. They are not dementia. They are actually still a person with the same. They feel hot and cold, love and fear, joy and happiness and sadness, just like the rest of us. So interact them as you would normally, because they are a normal person.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and thanks. And it very much kind of reflects back on what James is talking about, the care of dementia patients as well. So thank you. James, many people, their first interaction might be with a GP. I'm wondering if you just comment about the level of knowledge that you observe with GPs across Australia with their diagnosis, treatment, and indeed the care as well.
Yes, so GPs are the vital piece in primary health and really at the front line of caring for older people. But it's probably fair to say that knowledge of dementia can be quite variable between GPs, and that's a lot of that's down to their training. So the extent to which they've learnt much about dementia as medical students, and then through to what they experience as GPs in training. Research that we've done and other groups as well too, with tools that look at the level of dementia knowledge, have really shown that by and large GPs probably don't have the knowledge about dementia that perhaps the community might expect. And there's lots of reasons for that. One I think is related to Medicare funding. So with somebody with dementia, you really need to spend time with that person and their family. The diagnosis is not going to be quick. There aren't any Medicare funding items that specifically relate to getting a diagnosis or supporting somebody with dementia. So it's one that's a bit tricky for GPs. And it's also true to say that a lot of medical practitioners often have a degree of what we call diagnostic nihilism about dementia. They don't have available at their fingertips a drug or an intervention that they can provide. So they may not put a lot of value in providing or supporting a diagnosis. That is changing. I think over time, I think if you just take a sort of human rights attitude to dementia, it really is a human right to get a diagnosis, in the same way that if you had any other serious health or medical condition, you would expect to be able to get a diagnosis for that. So I think that's changing a lot. So GPs are incredibly important. More locally, we're introducing more dementia into our own undergraduate medical curriculum as well too. So hopefully that'll have a good flow-on effect. GPs are important, but so are likely to be what we call multidisciplinary cognition clinics. And this is when GPs can work with, say, geriatricians, neurologists, neuropsychologists, really to hopefully get a very accurate idea of what the diagnosis is. And then the other really important part is the post-diagnostic support. And there are other organisations that can provide that, such as Dementia Australia. So again, it's about linking people up with the right areas of support as well too.
So, James, we've talked about the MOOCs and how they've, received an enormous amount of attention and people undertaking them. Have you seen professionals? So I'm back to the GPs undertaking them and then coming back to you with, as Tim said, recommendations and changes and experiences there as well.
Yeah, so we've had many hundreds of GPs actually undertake the course, because we do ask questions at the beginning of the MOOC about people's professional backgrounds, but clearly not enough. So we still need to be able to get to more and more GPs, and including doctors who work in hospitals, because again, when the hospitals are experiencing a real growth in older people coming to hospital, many of which might have diagnosed or undiagnosed dementia as well too. Probably the largest health professional group that we do interact with is nurses, and that's been really very positive. Yeah. And after that, support workers of various kinds as well too, but also a growing number of people from various allied health backgrounds. So we've tried to design the MOOCs as much as possible to be accessible to people, in a sense, regardless of your background. So if you're a GP or a nurse or a physiotherapist, hopefully you'll be able to do the MOOCs and be able to get something useful out of it.
Terrific. Thanks, James. So I'm very conscious of time, and we do have many questions coming through and a number of pre-submitted questions, as I mentioned. So I've got one of the pre-submitted questions, perhaps for you, Tim, first. So Chris from Queensland was asking about researchers confirmed the value of quilting as an activity that promotes brain health, wellness, socialisation and mindfulness for our ageing community. She asked if you can comment on the importance of finding tools, techniques and technology that will allow older Australians to take up and then continue with such beneficial activities as long as possible.
What a great question. When I received this, I thought, this is interesting. And consider it this way. Our brain is a sensory-driven organism. Okay, this means that it thrives and survives and functions based on input that it receives. So the brain is essentially like a relay station, and the information coming in influences the information going out. So this question ties into the brain's ability to change and grow throughout time, depending on the environment. This is called a process called neuroplasticity, and which is the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new connections or strengthening current connections. And scientists believe that the brain can delay the development of serious cognitive deficit by changing and building new networks within the brain. So the benefit of brain training, like what quilting would be considered to improve cognitive functions, such as quilting, has been extensively reported, and the internet is teeming with suggestions. I'm not going to make any kind of recommendation on a particular program because everyone's brain is different. However, I do suggest that whatever brain stimulation you select, you do something that you're bad at. And I really mean that you're bad at. So, if you're not good at juggling, keep trying to juggle. If you currently can't play the guitar, then learn to play the guitar. Or if you can't play the trumpet, learn to play it or learn a new language. So all of these kind of activities are testing the brain to try to do new things. So quilting, if you think about it, it's not just sitting there sewing, it's choosing colors, patterns, techniques. There's a socialization component of it when you are in a group of people doing quilting, or when you are working collaboratively with other people to do a quilting pattern. So it encapsulates so many different levels. So I'd consider it as one of those areas that will fall into that brain training, brain stimulation activities.
Yeah, terrific. Thanks, Tim. That's really terrific advice, actually. I might just turn to the flip side question of that. Another pre-submitted one we received from Lynn. She was really asking, can you train the brain of dementia sufferers to relearn things by rote? So she used the example of us all learning our times table, which I suppose is a different side of what you're telling us, which is do what you're bad at. So this is learning by rote. Would you comment on that as well?
Yeah, with this one, I'm going to say maybe. And this is why every person is different. And once you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. I've mentioned neuroplasticity, and that's where the brain can reorganize itself from external stimulation. Rote learning is defined as memorization from repetitive activity. Like the best two examples is learning the alphabet and numbers. And because the impact of memory loss and dementia, this can be a real big challenge for someone with dementia. And the size of the task and the size of the information to be learned can vary greatly. However, what may not work for one person may work for someone else. And so one size doesn't fit all. So I'll bring it down to this. The simple point is, when you come to supporting a person with dementia, you need to try everything that you possibly can, everything and everything, to remain connected, respected, and dignified. So why not try rote learning? You know, it just might work for that individual.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. So James, we received a really interesting question from Diane. She was wanting to know if there'd been any research done on dementia in blind people, how to assess it and reduce its progression.
Thanks, Rebecca. Well, I'd probably say there's not enough research in this particular area as required. In particular, we don't really know that if you're, for example, born with blindness, or you developed visual impairment earlier in your life, whether that translates necessarily into risk of dementia. But there has been a lot more research on visual impairment in later life, and there's lots of things that will cause visual impairment later in life. Diabetes, cataracts, age-related macular degeneration, glaucoma, etc. And just in the last couple of years, we've had some quite large studies that have looked into this. And overall, not all of these studies agree, but overall, the indication is if you have a visual impairment later in life, that probably increases your risk by about 40 to 50%. Now, there's really important caveats in this, in the sense that some of these changes are aging related in the same way that dementia is. So maybe it is something about aging that is common to all of these conditions, rather than being related to each other. Also, when you take something like diabetic retinopathy, where there's a degeneration of the retina associated with diabetes, that will cause visual impairment, but diabetes also increases your risk of dementia. And some have even argued that perhaps some of the visual impairment that you see might actually be a very early manifestation of the brain changes related to dementia. Now, where we're getting some clarity on this, though, is, again, some very recent large-scale studies, particularly around cataracts. And then two of these large studies have shown that if you have cataracts at older age, and you don't manage that, or you don't have a surgical intervention, then you are at a higher risk of developing dementia. But if you've had cataracts and had that addressed medically, then your risk of dementia is the same as everybody else. So that would show that if, in fact, we can intervene in terms of that visual impairment, then that actually corrects for that heightened risk of dementia. But why does visual impairment lead to increased risk? Again, there's all sorts of thoughts around that. One is that, again, that your brain is a very plastic organ that requires sensory stimulation to be its most resilient, if you like. But another view is that perhaps people who have visual impairment, in the same way that we understand potentially people who have hearing impairment as well too, become a bit more socially withdrawn. And in fact, might be the social isolation, which is the important part of that dementia risk.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Thanks, James, and thanks for the question, Diane, as well. So the other side, I suppose, is research that's being undertaken, and we have a question from Astrid, who is a former student as well, who wants to see if you could comment around are you undertaking any research in relation to dementia and psychedelic medicines? Are there barriers to such research, and in your opinion, are these potential benefits as well?
Yes, well, again, recently there's huge interest in the use of psychedelics, particularly in what they call microdosing. So maybe using it in very small quantities to try and address some of these, I guess, brain conditions. Look, there's not enough research to be able to say whether it's a useful approach or not. But most of the studies that have been done in human beings are very small in scale and not necessarily focused on the dementia risk equation. Or I think, but there's a lot of studies that have been done in various animal models as well too, which look to be a bit promising. Overall, you probably have to say it's unlikely that psychedelics would have much of an effect on the progression of the diseases that cause dementia, or really probably impact on cognitive changes. But we do also know that with dementia that you will have changes potentially in behaviour and your mood and your emotional stability. And maybe it's in some of these non-cognitive areas that psychedelics might potentially turn out to be useful, but we actually do require more studies to be done. And there, again, a really important caveat is that the brain that is related to dementia is where a whole host of changes are occurring, including degenerative changes. So we really want to make sure that psychedelics don't make this worse. And I think there's a really important lesson there in other psychoactive drugs, such as the antipsychotics that have been used with people with dementia, where probably they're not really working in an antipsychotic fashion as we would understand that they might with psychiatric conditions, and they might actually be, at the end of the day, quite unhelpful and cause all sorts of harmful side effects. So yes, there's a lot of excitement about it, but I think we have to be careful, I guess, in looking about how we might be able to address that question through research.
Thank you. And thanks, Astrid, for submitting that question. So to something different, Tim, we've had a question from Satami saying they're studying a Master of Applied Positive Psychology, which is wellbeing science. Do people with dementia and family members benefit from positive psychology applications? And the second part to the question is, how about GPs and clinical professions caring for people with dementia? If they treat people with dementia with the knowledge of positive psychology, would they have a more trustworthy relationship with their clients?
Wow, what a question.
And you've got about 2 minutes to answer.
You got it. Okay,
No
straight
pressure.
into it. Okay, right. Okay. Basically, the first part of the question, I believe so, and this is why. How I understand it, positive psychology is a scientific study of strengths and virtues that enable individuals and communities to thrive, to better themselves. The field is founded on the belief that people want to learn, lead meaningful lives, cultivate the best within themselves, enhance experiences of love, work, play, and so forth. And this is tied very much up into the work by Thomas Kitwood of the 1980s, where he redefined the concept of dementia care. His work along the lines of positive person work, which is a positive interaction that promotes dignity, respect, and uniqueness for the person of living with dementia. And it contributes to them being more positive experiences for them as they live their life and their carers. This positive or people-centered care model encourages and empowers the caregiver to understand the person with dementia, and that they have personal beliefs and abilities and life experiences and relationships that are important to them and contribute to them and who they are as a person. So there's a synergy between the two. Regarding the second part of the questions, this gets a little bit more, grey. I believe, again, so, but there are a lot of caveats with this. We need to consider three components. We've got the loss of insight that happens with dementia. We've also got the theory of mind, and we've also got, finally, access to these kind of services. Every person with dementia at some stage through their development is going to lose insight. This is a symptom of dementia. And from the dementia, the disease that causes dementia, which impairs a person's ability to understand or perceive that they actually got an illness. Theory of mind is a theory by which all people start to understand other people. It generally occurs in early childhood, which is a dramatic change in a child's life, where they move from a preschooler person who is still egocentric, and they start to develop the important social cognitive skills, which allows them to understand what others are thinking, and thereby start to understand other people's actions in terms of their beliefs, their desires, their emotions, and helps them form responsive or correct response in situations. Unfortunately, due to the nature of dementia, cognitive and social skills will progressively deteriorate, and the person with dementia at some stage will recross that demarcation line back in being egocentric regarding the whole theory of mind. When we're looking at the challenges regarding access to clinical professionals and having access to positive psychology, people who care with dementia, that can be a bit tricky. There are current issues for people with dementia trying to access regular services like rehabilitation and reablement. And that's due to there's a lot of barriers, because people who deliver those services see there's a disconnect between the benefits of someone with dementia receiving reablement and rehabilitation. And I fear that there will be other professionals in the positive psychology area that may also have similar preconceived ideas and barriers that these services may not benefit a person with dementia because it hasn't been educated to them that there is a benefit to them. So I think there could be the same situation there.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Very interesting. Look, I'm very conscious of time, and we've got quite a few other questions to get through. But James, I think we'll just kind of come with some of the treatment questions that we've got as well. So one of our alum in Kale have asked, can dementia, this neurological problem, be treated successfully with stem cell therapy? Their understanding is that it is happening in Kuala Lumpur. Can you comment?
Yeah, there's really no evidence whatsoever that stem cell therapy is of benefit to the diseases that cause dementia, but there is a lot of research that's ongoing. I guess the main issue is that that people, in thinking about stem cells as intervention, that usually involves injecting them into one particular part of the brain. Now, unfortunately, most of the diseases that cause dementia don't just affect one part of the brain; they affect the many parts of the brain, and they're all interconnected. That said, still in some centres that they are, I guess, trying to place these stem cells in what they think might be areas that might be, for example, important for memory. The real advantage around stem cells, and this is work we do as well too, is what they offer for research into disease processes and new drugs, because you can take a skin cell from a subject or even a blood sample, and from that you can turn those into stem cells, and then you can turn the stem cells into neurons. And this is what we do in the Wicking Centre. So you can actually study the nerve cells of people who are otherwise, alive, rather than having to wait to study their brains after somebody dies. And so those can be used as great research tools to try and understand, again, disease processes, as well as to try and test new ideas around drugs.
Yeah, interesting, James. And look, I think we've got time for one more quick question I can see. If you could just comment briefly on your opinion on intermittent fasting and the low-carb approach to early cognitive impairment.
Well, it is difficult again because there's not really any substantial studies that have looked at that directly. We do know that obesity and in midlife, and then also many of these other vascular factors that can be related to diet and your relative levels of activity, do contribute towards risk. In terms of diets, the only diet that we know may potentially provide some benefit is the Mediterranean diet, and especially a blend of the Mediterranean diet, as well as diets that have been used to try and address particularly hypertension as well too. And these are often referred to as the MIND diets. So we don't really know whether fasting and ketogenic kind of diets, etc., do provide any benefits or not a good idea, but it's more than likely that I'm sure that people are doing research on that in places across the globe.
Wonderful. Thanks, James. And thank you, Tim, as well. I think we're really drawing to the close of today's Explore session on dementia, but thank you so much. It's really been an interesting and rich conversation that's traversed many different areas of both the care, the diagnosis, the understanding, the treatment. And I thank you both very much. I don't know if you had any final reflections at all. Putting you on the spot.
I know you are. I just think this series that you're running is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And what a great subject to have on this Explore, because it is one of those subjects that if you haven't not been touched by dementia yet, somewhere in the next few years, somehow you or your family or a loved one or a friend is going to get touched. So the more we can talk about this openly and have some of these more confronting but honest, difficult conversations we need to have, it's going to be the benefit to everyone is going to be immense.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. Thanks very much. James.
Well, I guess just very, very briefly, there's still a tremendous amount of work to do to address stigma around dementia in the community, and to increase the quality of care as well too. And I think that's where the education part is really important. So if participants in the webinar today may have done MOOC, you have my gratitude. But what also would be really wonderful is if you could recommend it to your friends, colleagues, and family as well too, because more that we can spread accurate, accounts of dementia, what causes dementia, how we might provide good quality care, potentially how we might deal with some of the risk factors, the better that will be. So we would love for people to help sort of share those messages around as much as possible.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again, James and Tim. It's just been a terrific session, and I know we'll probably have to revisit this again in one of our Explore. James, to pick up on what you said, if anybody's interested and has been inspired by today's session to learn more, you might like to consider enrolling in one of our upcoming free MOOCs. So the details are now up on our screens as well. And of course, it's important to note there are a range of support services that provide information and advice where you can reach out to. And there is a free telephone service that I think was up on the screen as well. A lot of information that we're sharing with you. So I did just want to advise the Preventing Dementia MOOC opens on Tuesday, the 16th of May. And then we have the Understanding Dementia MOOC, which opens on Tuesday, the 4th of July. So both of those are, we have information up on the screen now, and we encourage you, as James said, to engage with those MOOCs as they come along. Our alumni community, we're really thrilled that you joined us for Explore today. Soon you'll be receiving an invitation to attend the second session in the Explore series, as we'll be joined on the 4th of July by Dr. Rebecca Kelly with lots of conflicting information about diet in the media. Rebecca will talk you through her body of work on dietary nutrients and cardiovascular disease. The recording of this afternoon's presentation will soon be available on our YouTube channel, and you can access through the Explore website, and the link is now on your screens. We'd love to know if there's any topics you'd like to help us to explore and help you explore as well. Perhaps you're a member of the alumni community who'd like to offer your expertise. If so, please reach out to the team via the contact details that are on your screen now. That brings us to the end of today's presentation. Thank you once again for taking part in this session, and have a terrific afternoon.